Would you please open your Bible to Mark chapter 7 with me? I did not get to cover this chunk. We did, on Wednesday night class, we did the last part of Mark 4 and then all of Mark 5. And then this morning, we basically did the end of Mark 7 through the end of Mark chapter 10, talking about a theme. And it's likely that we'll do some more stuff in that theme next Sunday morning, in that 7 through 10 range. But I like this chunk too. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's a really good reminder for us. And I didn't ask Luke to say this, but Luke said the thing in his prayer just now about help us to not take credit, but give you the credit. It's kind of the direction that you see some of this. So in the first part, in Mark chapter 7 and verses 1 through 13, there's this long interaction that Jesus has with the Pharisees about how they think that Jesus and his disciples should be clean. We'll look at that, just one verse here. In verse 2, it says, "They saw that some of his disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed." And so there's this big thing about what makes you unclean. And the Pharisees had this standard of obeying the law and doing the finer points of the law. And you do the law and even step, a little outside of the law, a hedge around the law, so you obey the law plus some, and you're fine. It was this outward sense of cleanness. And then in verse 14, so this morning there were two different sections where there were three chunks. This is one of those. That's one. The second one is what Jesus says to his disciples after this. In verse 14, he called the people to him again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand, there is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him." And Jesus is making this point that will be very familiar to you. I'm not unclean and not right with God because I touched something that was unclean. I'm unclean and not right with God because of what's inside of me. That's the thing that makes me unclean. And then, this is my favorite part of this story. This is the one that we actually will read. And then there's a story. And I think most of us would be tempted to just say, okay, Jesus dealt with the Pharisees about cleanness, and Jesus said this thing about cleanness, and now we're moving on to a story. But the story is connected to the thing that we just talked about. Read it with me, starting in verse 24. "And from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, 'Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.' But she answered him, 'Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs.' And he said to her, 'For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter.' And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone." So, if we were in a class setting, I would ask two questions. We would have two sections of discussion. The first thing that I would say is, what are the external factors that the Pharisees would have said made this woman unclean? You could just go through the list here. In verse 24, they are in the region of Tyre and Sidon. Historically, those are enemies of God's people, Gentile territories, even in this day. She is as unclean of a woman as you possibly can be. It says, it heaps insists on three different things. It says she's a Gentile and she's Syro-Phoenician by birth. So she's a Gentile. Syro is Syrian. Phoenician is, the Phoenicians were always God's enemies throughout the scriptural history. And so we're heaping it on. Like this is, if we're the Pharisee looking for external factors that make a person unclean, this woman is at the top of the list. And not only that, her little daughter that she's coming to ask about has an unclean spirit. So you have an unclean woman pleading for her unclean daughter who has an unclean spirit in an unclean place. But do you remember the first thing that Jesus said? It's not that stuff externally that makes you unclean and not right with God. And so the second question that I would ask if we were doing discussion or a class setting is, what was this woman's heart like? As you read through the story, what do you see that's on the inside of her? Verses 24 and 25, she sought out Jesus. The second part of verse 25, she fell at his feet. In verse 26, she's persistent and she's repeating her request. She knows that Jesus has the solution to her problem and she will not go away until Jesus responds. Jesus says this thing. There's all kinds of explanations about it, but it seems like he's being nasty in what he says. Let the children, don't eat the crumbs. This thing that he says, and when we read that, we go, it's kind of harsh. But look at the woman's response. Yes, Lord. She accepted that she had no right to sit at the master's table. And so this thing that we talked about, it's not the stuff outside that makes you unclean and not right with God. It's the stuff inside that God cares about. And this woman had the right stuff on the inside. Her heart was in the right place. I just want to read this quote. It's from David Garland's commentary on Mark, and then I'll be done. The woman's attitude in the face of refusal is the key to this passage. She comes empty-handed and can make no claim. She has no merit, no priority standing, nothing to commend her. Her manner is the opposite of the snippety, you owe me attitude that prevails among so many today. She does not argue that her case is an exception or lobby for special treatment. She accepts his judgment and bows down as a beggar for grace. And the thing about this story is that every single one of us is this woman. We are the unclean person who comes to Jesus not standing upright as if he owes anything to me. He doesn't. But to say, you are the solution to my problem, the only solution to my problem of spiritual death and separation from God as a result of my sin. And so what we do is we bow down to the ground, we put our face in the dirt, and we say, I don't even deserve to speak to you, but would you help me? That's what I was thinking of when Luke said his prayer. Let us not come here and think that any of this is any credit to us. It's not. All glory and all praise goes to God. So that's our attitude reminder about how we approach God and how we think of ourselves in his presence. If you're here tonight and you're not a Christian and you're ready to come to God through Jesus and say, I have no right to stand before you, but through your Son, I will gladly take my place at your feet by your throne. We'd like to help you with that. Come forward as we stand and sing the invitation song.